Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online, news that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Johnny Coker. In this episode, we're going to learn about the housing projects being pursued by the city of Las Cruces, and we're going to hold a discussion on how best to respond to the growing population of people experiencing homelessness. Affordable housing is a growing problem in the city of Las Cruces, and being able to afford rent is difficult for some residents of the city. I talked with community members as well as government officials in this report. Rebecca and Jared are both residents of Las Cruces and recently found housing through the Mesilla Valley Community of Hope, a nonprofit that aids individuals experiencing homelessness in the community. After 6 months of being unhoused, Rebecca said that she is grateful for the assistance, but more needs to be done on a legislative level to help struggling families.
I was born and raised here, and I have never in all my life seen the homelessness and everything this bad. It was never this bad.
Rebecca said that rent for their trailer adds up to $745 a month, and that the main problem in the city is landlords pricing out low-income renters.
They raise them anywhere from 100 to 150% higher. And people here, they're struggling enough as it is because the utilities are high that at the time they get into a place, they're sitting there going, okay, well, are we going to pay utilities this month or are we going to use the money for food?
In 2022, evictions in the United States went up over 80% from the previous year, according to a report by evictionlab.org. Since March of 2020, there have been almost 31,000 eviction filings in New Mexico, with nearly 1,300 filings last month. According to Joanna Bencomo, Las Cruces City Councilor for District 4, the city has been feeling the effects of rising eviction rates.
If you talk to our housing staff, they have been getting calls almost every day on, I'm getting evicted, I don't know what to do. The burden is really on the tenant. They have very few rights in the state, and I think that's one of the changes that some representatives were trying to make at the state level and then didn't go through. For us, what we can affect is moving forward a source of income discrimination ordinance that hopefully will come to vote to a council pretty soon so that landlords cannot discriminate against potential tenants because they may have a housing voucher, for example.
This year, the city of Las Cruces is receiving $1.5 million in federal funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to invest into housing projects, including continued investment into the Mesilla Valley Community of Hope. Bencomo says that the way out of the housing crisis is to continue this type of investment into the community.
If people want to see the issue of unhoused people resolved, that we have to build more housing, that we have to build more supportive housing, right? People who have lived on the street have experienced trauma. And so giving them a shelter doesn't immediately resolve all of the issues, right? They need supportive housing. They need to make sure that they have access to food, to medical services, to mental health services. And so the issue is big and broad and comprehensive, and we're working on that because that's the only way forward.
At the federal level, United States Senator Martin Heinrich said that he's working to shine a light on the housing needs of New Mexicans.
One of the things we're doing right now is just working the budget process, and I sent a letter to the president saying we really need to look at all the pieces and parts in the federal budget that facilitate housing and prioritize those. This is an issue that's hitting communities all across the country, and then we need to look for new solutions as well.
As for Rebecca and Jared, they say their trailer is much more comfortable than Camp Hope, but ultimately, Las Cruces needs more shelters for individuals living on the streets.
Because living in that tent, I don't know how you guys can do it down here, but boy, when that wind blows, it's a hell of a ride.
The projects funded by the Department of Housing and Urban Development are scheduled to begin this summer. Moving on, we're talking with Natalie Green on the issue of housing in the city. She's the Housing and Neighborhood Services Manager for the city of Las Cruces. Natalie, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me today.
So I just wanted to start off by talking about Action Plan 2023. What exactly is that going to do for the city in terms of housing needs?
The action plan is a document that we prepare every year that tells us how we are going to spend community development block grant funds and home investment partnership program funding. And so through that plan, we plan to invest about $158,000 in tenant-based rental assistance programming, and then we have $300,000 from both sources to a senior affordable housing complex, and then there's also a set aside for some single-family housing in the city of Las Cruces.
So in terms of housing, the action plan helps there, but it also helps with funding in terms of some nonprofits and things like that. So can you go into a little bit more about that as well?
Sure. Every year as part of that process, we set aside about 15%, and that goes directly to nonprofits for public services. And so we have 6 this year that we're looking to fund. That's the Mesilla Valley Community Hope for the Homeless Day Shelter, Casa de Peregrinos for the food security program, Catholic Charities, which is helping homeless teens, Jardín de los Niños, which is helping homeless and near homeless children with daycare services, and then La Casa for their domestic violence shelter is a big one, and then Mesilla Valley Casa, which helps foster kids in the third judicial court district get Casa volunteers.
Mm-hmm. So just in your own words, how important is it for the city of Las Cruces to be partnering with these nonprofits in order to serve the community within Las Cruces?
Nonprofits are essential to all the services that we provide across the city. I often say that nonprofits, they do it better, they do it faster, and they certainly do it more affordably than the city ever could. And so I feel very honored that we get to work with all the nonprofits, not just the ones I mentioned, but we work with at least a half a dozen on various projects all across the city. And they're excellent at what they do, and we support their missions.
Okay. Well, so let's talk a little bit about some of the legislation or the GO bonds that were passed this last election cycle in 2022. What are the status, in terms of the housing GO bond at least, what's the status of those? I know the city was looking at, the goal is like 300 affordable housing units by 2025, is that correct?
That is our target goal, and so we've done a number of things. The first we did is we just finished amending the committee that will be the advisory committee, and so council appointed 3 members. They're going to appoint 2 more on Monday, and then as soon as we have the full board, we're going to start working with our consultant for the affordable housing implementation strategy, and then we anticipate that we would put a call for projects late fall and have those projects picked out by the time the city's ready to sell the bond in December. And so we do have a number of projects all in our pipeline in various sort of states of development. And so even though the GO bond hasn't been sold, we're still moving forward with a whole host of projects.
Sure. So, I know the bond itself is a $6 million investment from the city, is that correct? But then it's somehow you're able to leverage that funding into more funding, is that correct?
Yeah, so the bond will help put funding into the trust fund, and then we use that trust fund to either make loans or grants to development partners, and then access sort of other funding sources. So one example is our 3 Sisters, which we anticipate starting construction later in the summer. Council loaned the project $2.4 million, and it was awarded tax credit funding and is about a $16 million project. And so that'll start construction and build 70 units of family housing near the Hadley area. And so the GO bond would be leveraged similarly to access there's state and federal resources for affordable housing.
So I know you told me back in November when I was, when I did a story about those GO bonds, that the city needs 5,600 rental units and about 6,000 single-family homes for buyers to meet the demand in the city. With the rate that the city is building its units, it seems like just such a small drop in the bucket. So how do you think that void can be filled in terms of, affordable housing?
the city can't do it alone, so there are ways that we can partner with the private market. There's other things that the city is exploring, like policy changes around zoning and infill development that are able to help the private industry build housing. Again, while we're short affordable housing units, there's really a shortage of housing across all incomes. And so we know that if we help incentivize other housing types through policy changes, then we're just increasing supply for everyone. I
Sure.
think everyone's sort of feeling the crunch of, high single family house costs, trying to find a rental. We get calls every day about people looking for places to live or buy.
So can you talk about these other policy changes? What have you and the city in general, what are some of those policy changes that are being looked at?
The biggest project that's being worked on by our community development team is the Realize Las Cruces, which is a zoning code rewrite. And so there's a team of consultants and city staff that are looking at all things zoning, from sidewalks to landscaping to densities. One of the things that we're keeping an eye on is the permissive use of accessory dwelling units. So in single family areas, if people have the space and the setbacks and the ability, they could build like a casita or an accessory unit that could then be used as housing. And so we see that as an opportunity to increase supply without necessarily increasing like urban sprawl or so it's a good way to balance that need.
And in terms of these housing initiatives being put forth by the city, are you also looking at maybe more auxiliary services around these projects, like public transport and things like that?
A lot of times when we fund projects, especially the large multifamily tax credit projects, we look at what we call locational efficiency. So is it near public transit? Does it have access to a bank or a grocery store or other sort of amenities in the community? So that is part of our evaluation when we select projects for funding.
So, and I know this is becoming more of a popular sort of idea, is to change zoning laws into cities becoming more walkable and more accessible to people who may not have the ability or even the funds to own a car. Is that something that the city of Las Cruces would like to start implementing a little more, or?
There are some departments that have worked on things like complete streets, or again, when we adopted Elevate, it did allow or talk about more complete neighborhoods and ensuring, especially new neighborhoods, and then as we go and retrofit older parts of the city, that they do become more walkable and have more connectivity. So I know some of the other departments have been working on that.
Here's one of the biggest issues that, at least that I've seen, is that nearly half of New Mexicans are paying over a third of their income in housing costs, and that's according to a report by the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority. So, as the housing and neighborhood services manager, what do you think is the best way for people to, not be so burdened by, rent being such a huge chunk of their income, and how can we get that money elsewhere in the economy rather than just, rental companies and things like that?
Well, that's one of the reasons we're sort of working on the full continuum, is we want to make sure that people have housing choice all across the spectrum. Housing is the largest, or generally the largest, recurring expense that our families have. And so if they are spending, and our data's, a lot of them are spending at least 30%, if not more, and then we have a significant percentage of the population that's spending 50% of their income on housing costs. And so when they're spending that much, we know they're having to make some pretty tough decisions around paying rent, or eating, or taking care of medical care, or child care issues. So we definitely want to address that cost burden through affordable housing and bring those costs down for families.
Absolutely. So the other thing is that since pandemic restrictions have sort of eased off and it's no longer a public national health emergency, according to our federal government. Eviction rates are on the rise. And is that something that y'all have seen on the city side? And if so, what is the city doing to address, to help people not end up on the street, basically?
We're very lucky in that we have a partner in Doña Ana County. And so they have emergency rental assistance payments, and so they have been helping households pay either back rents or any arrears to help prevent evictions. We also have some partners that do get eviction prevention fund, not necessarily through the city, but we do support those agencies in those efforts. Our office does get quite a few calls about people who are either being evicted or need to find a place to live, so we do help field those calls. And then I have seen some advocacy at the state level that they're looking to work on sort of those eviction timelines to maybe give families the opportunity to come into compliance with their leases. And so I know the state legislation hasn't been as successful as we'd like it to be.
One thing, and we touched on this a little bit when we were talking about nonprofits and stuff, but some people I've talked to in my reporting get worried about the amount of government spending, and they say, whenever the city spends on affordable housing, then it becomes very bureaucratic and a slow process and ends up just costing taxpayers, too much money, more money than it's worth type of thing. What would your response to that be?
It could. It certainly, of course, government complicates everything. That's not a secret, but I think that if the market was providing the housing that people needed, there wouldn't be a need for affordable housing. And so we do see the private market as our partners. We're certainly we're not going to be the sole solution to the housing crisis. And for that, the housing crisis isn't really specific to Las Cruces, right? It's something that we're seeing nationally, certainly statewide. MFA, you mentioned, has put out a lot of information around the needs statewide. And so one of the things I would say is that the federal government is allocating this money for affordable housing. And so they're going to spend it anyway, so why not in Las Cruces? I think in my opinion, it's better for us to be able to have those resources here for our residents than somewhere else across the state or across the country. So.
Absolutely. So, in terms of people experiencing homelessness, and specifically, I mean, it's a nationwide issue, but specifically in Las Cruces, at least anecdotally, I hear a lot of people saying, it's worse than I've ever seen it before. As a city official, what would you attribute that to? And what do you think our way out of this is? And I know that's a tough question, but maybe not one simple answer, but I just wanted to hear your take on it.
So homelessness, it's a very complex issue. I did see the preliminary data on the point in time count. So every year in January, there's a nationwide count of people experiencing homelessness. And so Doña Ana County is on the higher end of that spectrum for New Mexico. So residents are correct that there is an increase in homelessness in this area. What we're sort of working on with our partners is, again, we're looking to explore additional safe encampment areas, build some more permanent supportive housing for that housing type. There is certainly a call to some of our state and federal government to look at mental health issues, substance use issues. We do have some funding to provide housing opportunities, but just because we house someone experiencing homelessness doesn't mean that they're able to stay successfully housed without that partnership and supportive services. So we really have to look at the whole picture. And if there was a really easy solution, then I think our city council and our staff would be working on that
Sure.
if it was easy.
Right. So here's the thing. I mean, and I want you to respond to this as well, to people who say, I don't want my tax dollars being used to just sort of enable people to get free housing and things like that. And it's people that say it's hurting the economy. What would your response to that be?
Oh, that's a good question. I think what we hear a lot about homelessness is it's the visibility, and there's certainly pressure to respond to the visibility of homelessness, and the best way to not see people experiencing homelessness is to provide housing and to ensure that they're able to transition into their units and get those supportive services, and then you're not going to see unsheltered individuals in our community.
So, I mean, I would assume it would be a better thing for the economy and for the sort of tax base to not be living on the street, to have somewhere and to have somewhere to rehabilitate, basically. Is that what you're saying?
Certainly, and there is some data, especially out of Albuquerque and Colorado, that says the cost of doing nothing is not nothing. And so when we don't address people experiencing homelessness through housing, then we're addressing them through other means. That's certainly more costly. That's emergency room costs, public safety call-outs for police or fire to respond. There's even a cost to an overnight in jail. And so it is certainly much more affordable to pay for an apartment than it is to house someone for one night in an emergency room or in a other facility.
Natalie Green is the Housing and Neighborhood Services Manager for the City of Las Cruces. Natalie, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
We now move on to the topic of food insecurity. With the rollback of pandemic SNAP benefits, some residents in the city are finding it difficult to put food on the table. I talked to affected members of the community in this report. At the beginning of March, New Mexicans stopped receiving federal emergency allotments from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. The emergency allotments began in 2020 as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and gave a family of 3 a maximum of $750 a month to be spent on food items. With the end of the emergency allotments, a family of 3 will return to receiving $335 per month, according to the New Mexico Human Services Department. With the end of the extra SNAP benefits, food pantries are preparing to help those in need of nutritional assistance. Lorenzo Alba Jr. is the executive director of Casa de Peregrinos. He said that it's the mission of the organization to make sure that the less fortunate individuals within the community don't go hungry due to a lack of resources.
Everybody knows a family that's going through food insecurity. Everybody in this community knows a family that's going through this tough time. And right now, while we go through this inflation issue and this cost of food issue, I think it's going to be super important that people know where we are. Nearly 40% of the people that we serve are children. Another 20% are seniors. And we can get those people taken care of, we are doing our job then.
Alba said that the end of pandemic assistance under the SNAP food program has led to an influx of people looking for help at the food pantry.
It doesn't help that it happens when inflation and the cost of food is so high. That is something that has affected a lot of families that we currently serve. We're beginning to see more people show up even at our rural pantries because what they're telling us is the cost of fuel, cost of gas, and obviously the cost of food. So they're coming to see us, new people that we haven't seen in a while or that haven't been to our pantries ever are beginning to come to our pantries.
For many in the Las Cruces area, food pantries like Casa de Peregrinos are essential to feeding their families. Mary Gonzalez is a resident of Las Cruces. She said that the pantry has been a big help to her as it's a struggle to be able to feed her family with the benefits that she's currently receiving.
Money doesn't last us. Everything is very expensive. The food, the basic necessities. You have to think twice about going to the store. Money just doesn't last anymore, and it's affecting us.
Between 2019 and 2021, an average of 11.5% of New Mexico households were food insecure, according to the United States Department of Agriculture. With the end of the benefits, some community members are bracing for a difficult road ahead. Jess Carrington is a resident of Las Cruces and an expecting mother. She said that she feels that government officials, particularly at the federal level, have trouble understanding the everyday issues that someone at her income level deals with every day. and that the cutting of the SNAP benefits is a reflection of that.
And especially expecting the baby, it's just been cutting corners. And so even with the food stamps that we do receive, of course, places like this, like Casa Pellegrinos, is definitely added to our stability of food, Of course, there's a huge income gap, so people that are in Congress and stuff like that, they just don't know what it is like to walk into the shoes of somebody in the poverty level.
Carrington said that with the rising cost of goods, living day to day is becoming more difficult.
Well, you can imagine what you would do to feed your kids. People that are hungry will do almost anything to make their family secure. And food is one of the things. You need water, you need food, and you need shelter. And without those things, then you can't provide a healthy lifestyle for your kids. So, I can't slap the hand of somebody who goes to Walmart and steals a loaf of bread to feed their kids,
While the result of losing the extra SNAP benefits are already being felt by Casa de Peregrinos, Alba said that he expects a continuing influx of individuals in need throughout the summer and beyond. That's our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio. Every weekday, it's Morning Edition 5 to 9, Fresh Air at 11, followed by Here and Now noon to 2, and All Things Considered from 4 to 7. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org. And we'd like to hear from you, so email us with a story and video ideas, video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Johnny Coker. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time on Newsmakers.